Let me begin by thanking the club and SNR Denton for hosting this event. Seeing your activities and the list of people that are speaking at coming events, I'm kind of humbled. You clearly have a reach into some very great talent, and I'm sure that makes for a very rich experience in the club. But let's move a little bit away from technology and talk about emerging markets. Pardon me. I'm going to focus a little bit more on EBRD's part of the world, but let's give a quick overview. It's not surprising, I think, that particularly here on the West Coast, you see the strong growth in emerging markets. China, India, Korea not really an emerging market anymore, it's an emerged market. And to a certain extent, Brazil or South Africa, who are seen as growth leaders. But what is perhaps less well appreciated are the blue bars on this graph, representing from left to right Kazakhstan, Russia, Latvia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland, who have not been showing such shabby growth over a protracted period of time. They're kind of sleepers in the minds, I think, of most international investors. Some of those markets have recovered pretty well out of the 2008 crisis. Some, you don't hear me too well? Is that better? I think maybe, let me just move. How's that? No? That better? Yeah. Okay. Some of these economies have recovered quite nicely. Others are moving sideways or backwards. A few of them never shrank in the crisis. Poland, for example, has showed consistent positive growth. The resilience of Central and Eastern Europe is rather remarkable. We call this the transition region. Transition in the sense that the economies are moving from command economies to market economies. And the characteristics are market-oriented reforms, better integration with the World Trading Network, financial integration with the West, and in many cases political integration, as more and more of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe are EU members or candidates. This has resulted in quite a rapid catch-up of living standards, growing prosperity, emergence of a middle class with high propensity to consume. But rapid growth and change also brings weaknesses as parts of the economy and parts of the legal and political system don't necessarily mature at the same pace. There we go. One example is exports. The region has been an export powerhouse and quite surprisingly growing as fast in China, at least in terms of share of total world exports. Why is that? This region, I would say, is broadly speaking analogous to, say, a Mexico for the United States. It's represented a pool of trained, low-cost labor, physically close to large markets, which have rising difficulties in maintaining manufacturing competitiveness. So it's a very simple business model to grow by exporting your factories to Central and Eastern Europe and the CIS and importing what they produce back into France or Germany, for example. But at some point that runs out of steam. And simply low-cost labor and physical proximity are not enough for an emerging market to show long-term growth. some of the factors I've outlined in this slide. Obviously, you need to have a stable underlying economy, but that's not sufficient. Financial vulnerability is oftentimes very high in these economies. Institutions and market infrastructure tend to be weak. What does this mean? There isn't a big domestic savings mobilization. People finance their businesses in hard currencies rather than local currencies. They borrow from abroad. There isn't a capital market, so you can't go out and raise bonds or float your company. Everything is dependent on leverage or basically family capital. Insurance is a nascent industry, so there isn't a pool of long-term investors. The cycle never gets started. There's a big problem, a big challenge of reinvigorating or reestablishing what would be a functioning capital market in many of these countries. Sector-level reforms. We see the beginning of some reforms. For example, rationalization of public utilities, corporatization of many public services, privatization of some industries. But oftentimes this is done in an incomplete legal environment, without a functioning judiciary, with incomplete legislation, and tax laws and practices which are archaic, complex, and I think crudely stated are designed more to provide bribe opportunities for public officials than to serve the public treasury. What are the policy implications of this? Well, there's a lot of work to be done. Not just tariffs, non-tariff barriers, customs efficiency, reduction of corruption, entrenching the rule of law, oftentimes establishing law, modern commercial codes, codes that permit modern financial products. In many countries, it's impossible to issue a preferred share or a debenture. The tools which you here in the Valley sort of whip off your standard term sheets in a blink of an eye are oftentimes impossible to use where we operate. So capitalism, entrepreneurship has a very different structure for its financing in the region in which we work. Now, it's a time of stress, recovery from what we hope is recovery from the recent downturns. Is it a time for reform? We certainly hope so. There's always a big fear that when things get tough, policymakers don't react and don't seize the opportunity. They in effect waste a crisis. But a crisis can be a good thing. It can give an incentive for change. It can give a political cover to decision makers who are bold enough to seize the opportunity and introduce reforms. And we certainly think that this has happened in a few of the countries in which we work and wish it would happen in more. That's a big picture on emerging markets, at least in our region for the moment. Let me just give a couple of background facts on EBRD. What are we? We're an international financial institution, obviously, created to promote the transition to market economy in the former CIS, Russia, Soviet Union, satellite nations, shall we say. We're owned by 61 countries and 2 intergovernmental organizations, the European Investment Bank and the European Commission itself. We have a capital base of 30 billion euros and have, in our life of 20 years now, made cumulative commitments of 62 billion euros in debt and equity financing. We promote this market economy transition by investing mainly in the private sector. But we also seek to mobilize financing for the private sector to develop the capital markets and the financing infrastructure which is necessary for the private sector to prosper. We are very active in privatization, corporate restructurings, and we work also with governments and municipalities largely to corporatize and improve the provision of public services. And of course, we seek to do this in an environmentally sound and sustainable fashion. 25% actually of what we do is, broadly speaking, focused on environment and sustainability. That 62 billion euros of investment represents close to 3,200 projects right now. About 80% of what we do is private sector. We take actual private sector risk. The people that we finance in our countries of operation are oftentimes people like you who are out there facing the market, the cold realities of the market. And we do this without government guarantee, without subsidy. We do it on market terms. Most of what we do is debt, but depending upon the year, between 15 and 30% of our activity will be in equity and quasi-equity. This year we're running at a pace of about 9 billion euros and close to 400 transactions. The EU comprises most of our shareholders, 63%. The US is the largest individual shareholder at 10%, but we also have as shareholders all of the countries in which we operate, plus Mexico, Canada, the United States, Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, Egypt, and Morocco, and watch that space. Where do we operate? 30 countries, of which we're open for new investment in 29. The Czech Republic has been a great economic success, and they have graduated. 36 offices spread in those countries, so that we tend to be quite local. In Russia, we have 7 offices alone, 100 bankers in Moscow, and large presence in St. Petersburg. 2 offices in Kazakhstan, and a very significant presence in those marketplaces. In most of those countries, we would be classified as the largest individual private sector investor. As I mentioned, we're mostly private sector focused. Equity is an important part, but a minority of our business. In the recent years, we've done a lot of work with the banking sector, with equity and Tier 2 capital to help support an industry which is very challenged. Much of the banking system in these countries is owned by Western European parent banks. There was a very real concern that those banks would tend to focus on their home country concerns and might actually shrink out of the region. Our activity, our support of them has helped to keep them in the region active and lending. Sustainable energy investments, 2.66 billion last year. This sounds a little bit Gosplan that we exceed our 3-year target rather substantially, but I think that it's reflective of the fact that we have focused on something which is very important. Those of you who are from these countries know just how inefficiently energy is used. The average energy intensity of the economies is between 5 and 7 times that of Western Europe. So that represents a huge cost, a huge carbon burden, and a great opportunity for very good paybacks from very low-risk investments. We also focus on a lot of the smaller countries, Western Balkans and what we call the early transition countries, which would be basically the Central Asian countries and Belarus. Our focus is about a third in financial institutions, but we also do a great amount of business in agribusiness, transport, power, natural resources, infrastructure, manufacturing, and services. Equity funds represents 4% of our portfolio. That may not seem like a lot, but we were the basic anchor LP for much of the creation of the private equity industry in the region. And we have been through with the likes of Advent for 5 funds, starting with their first. Those of you who know the industry in the region will recognize many of the names that we have backed. And we continue backing new teams. This is important. As the successful managers grow, there's a vacuum left behind in working with small and medium businesses. If you've got a €1 billion fund, you're not going to be doing 5 and 10 million euro transactions. But there is a huge cry for capital by these entrepreneurs who have rather modest businesses that still are growing. And we like to support private equity managers that show promise and a willingness to commit to work in the somewhat more challenging small and medium space. I mentioned that we do loans and equity.
I have a question. Why you decided to have 30% in financial institution? That means that you want a mediator that take loans.
Well, yes. We're not going to be able to go out and do a leasing transaction for a company that needs to lease a computer or 2 trucks or transactions of that nature. So by supporting the banking sector, we get credit to businesses much more efficiently than we can do ourselves. We will do transactions of €500,000. Our average transaction, though, is about €22 million. It's just not efficient with under 1,000 bankers to be doing lots of small deals. So using the financial sector is important. Also, what that does is it creates a capacity far beyond our institutional capacity to service the consumer and the small businessman. We also support microfinance groups, which get down to the very lowest levels of entrepreneurship. And at the end of the day, a functioning financial system is really the engine on which the real sector runs. So it's systemic. It's absolutely fundamental for developing a private market economy.
And do you have metrics how you measure how efficient are those institutions that are already embedded in maybe a non-efficient system?
Profit and loss. It's a simple scorecard. Can you make money? How much money do you lose in lending to your clients? How well do you recover? Are you capable of growth? Are you capable of funding yourself? We're a very business focused institution. The majority of my bankers come from commercial and investment banking backgrounds. We're not a bunch of government bureaucrats. I think that's what makes EBRD such an interesting place. And it's what makes us, I think, quite effective, because we understand what it is to deal with a client, to have competition, and to need to do better than the next person on the street in order to keep that client and to keep his trust and to build our business. As you saw the hockey stick-like graph, we have grown very substantially, and we have done it profitably. Last year we turned in over €1 billion of profit on our €20 billion capital base. And we, by the way, leverage ourselves only 1-to-1. So that is hugely inefficient in terms of capital utilization, but it gives our bondholders a great deal of comfort and keeps our AAA rating. So, products, we can be any place in the capital structure. Equity, preferred, convertible, senior debt, guarantees. We can intermediate currency swaps. What does the client need? What is missing in the financial marketplace that we can provide? These are the questions that we ask ourselves when we talk with a business. Where is it that EBRD can fill a gap that will allow the market to go ahead and do the remainder of the transaction? We seek to be very additional. That is to say, we want to see more money coming from other sources than from our pocket in the support of the private sector. So typically we would represent no more than 35% of the finance for a particular investment project, for example. But we are a risk taker. I mentioned that we work primarily with the private sector, and we do that without government guarantee, we do that without subsidy, we do that without any form of support. We are there next to the entrepreneur taking the risks that they take. And as a result, we learn an awful lot about what it is to be an entrepreneur and what the business environment is in the countries in which we work. This gives us a great degree of first-hand knowledge to sit down with our shareholders, who at the end of the day are those governments, and to talk with them about what is working and what isn't working, and what needs to be changed. How can one better address tax situations, which I mentioned were often pressing, or what are the impacts of government policies such as grain export controls on the food markets in these countries? What does this mean for agro-industry? What does it mean for the country's overall competitiveness? These are the kinds of things that we oftentimes debate on. But we also get into a variety of other areas such as electric power, tariffs, deregulation of public utilities. There probably isn't a public policy issue that we haven't run across in our history with our portfolio companies, and have had an opportunity to work with them on. We want to be very catalytical, as I mentioned. We want to be very local, close to the client, aware of the local situation, and able to engage with decision makers in order to improve the business environment and climate to better develop the market economy. The last point, protection of minority interests, corporate governance. Rule of law and fair treatment of minority shareholders is oftentimes not the common practice. It's changing. It's improved a lot. But we still have a very active role to play as a minority shareholder in many companies, bringing in professional and independent board members to improve corporate governance, oftentimes working with companies who will do their first IFRS audit and publish financial statements for the first time, introducing audit committees and compensation committees, things which are rather routine over here, are still not the common practice throughout much of our region. So there's a big impact that we can have on corporate governance, transparency, and fostering entrepreneurs' willingness to take risks by sharing those risks and by protecting them against some of the excesses which are often practiced by more predatory members of society. I'm not going to go too much more into the advertisement for EBRD. You can read this yourself, and I can assure you that all that it says is that we're good and competent. But we face, along with the private sector, lots of challenges. This job is anything but boring. Every day is different, and there's a very long agenda yet to be accomplished before these economies really have a deep and fully functioning market economy. But there are some interesting things happening and some good opportunities that we see. Near and dear to all of your hearts, I think, is economic diversification, development of the knowledge economy, for whatever that means. Technology, internationalization of businesses, recognizing that one has to compete internationally, not just locally or nationally. Sharing of technology, sharing of intellectual capital, protection of that intellectual capital. These are all important themes where we're engaged, including with some Silicon Valley managers and firms. And I think that this is very much a growth area. What has happened in other countries, I can see will happen in Russia, in much of the region in which we are operating. And it will happen because of people like you, people who have an interest in the region, who maybe have a cultural affinity. In many cases, perhaps were born and raised there, have come here for education or job opportunities. I predict many of you will be going back or will be dealing with friends and associates back home. And that this interlinkage is going to bring great benefits for the development of those countries and hopefully for your personal net worth as well. That's entrepreneurship, taking the risks and increasing that net worth. And that is what EBRD seeks to support. I think at this point I'm going to leave it there. We've got some examples of the kinds of clients that we've worked with. I mentioned Advent is one of the fund managers. Wind farms is an example of alternative energies. Industrial parks, the basic infrastructure that is needed for business, and a variety of financial and industrial investments. I've probably spoken for too long, but I hope that you'll have found it informative and at least somewhat useful. But now let's let the real fun begin with your questions and what's on your mind and what you'd really like to hear about.
Let me open the floor for questions.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Neversnev. I'm a manager of operations in company 59. So my question is, what would you see as for us, for entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley, was, let's say, Russians or other countries in the Eastern Bloc? What would you see as opportunities to make money with you or with anybody else who you are connected with, using our experience, using our connections here and in Russia? Any ideas, suggestions?
This is kind of the reverse of a college idea fair, I guess, then, huh? No, seriously, where's not to look? I think that's the question. What I would say is an imitation business model is not going to fly today. Everyone has tried to become the Google of Russia. Someone's been successful at that, or the Facebook of this, or whatever. What you need to find is a market opportunity that could be here in the United States, in Japan, in Europe, India even. Why not compete with the Indians? And fill it. And to mobilize the talent that exists, And there's huge talent in these countries. Some of it is here, some of it has gone back, some of it is floating around. That's what it's all about. Find an opportunity, a vacuum to fill, and then fill it very well.
I actually have a question. So what are the criteria for EBRD to pick the investment, and then how do you do the due diligence, and how do you manage your investment once it's done? Especially, so I know you're a limited partner at the Almas Capital Partners Fund, so can you also elaborate a little bit on that? So how do you just do this with venture funds, and how do you manage this process?
Sure. Well, let's talk about the direct investment. There we would be just like any other private equity investor. We would look to the quality of the firm, the quality and the integrity of its management, the transparency and reliability of its reporting, and the fundamental business. Is this a sensible, competitive business that is going to be successful? There's no secret about the factors that make for business success. And then, of course, the next questions are, where are they going? How much money do they need, and what kind of money do they need? And if it's an equity investment, how are we going to get out? I think you'll find that we behave just like any other private equity investor, with the exception that we are not control-oriented. We are a minority investor. So for that reason, we like to invest alongside of other institutional investors. Or we like to invest where we have a very clear path to public liquidity, perhaps in an expansion stage of a company who is unable to tap into the public markets because they've basically closed in recent years. Or sometimes we will do pre-privatization investments, a state entity that is going to be privatized, which is in the process of being turned into a freestanding profit-making corporation, where we will take an early role in establishing the commercial integrity of the firm, the governance, the institutionalization which is necessary ahead of going to the market. What opportunities do we choose? We choose the ones that appear to best meet those criteria, and again, where we are very, very comfortable with the quality and integrity of management.
Hi, it's Jostein Svendsen, and I'm very pleased to hear you're saying you're ready to back new teams, because I'm actually a member of a small team who are now working on building a Silicon Valley type of venture firm targeting Scope. And I know that we are in some discussions actually to get EBRD in as a lead investor. And if we get EBRD in as the lead investor, then the next round we will be talking to you here in Silicon Valley to get you guys to participate in that venture fund, to basically to come with the Silicon Valley type of VC into the Russian market, into the new Silicon Valley you're building here. And I would be very interested to talk to anybody here who are interested in participating and working with us on this, both to source opportunities from Silicon Valley towards Russia, but also Russian opportunities and other opportunities in the wider region that the EBRD are covering, and help them to go global. So we haven't met before, but I have a feeling we will be meeting many times in the near future.
Good, thank you. Let me stress that we are open to working with new managers, and we like to see new teams that have the capacity to come into these markets. We also like to see market money coming in, because while we're happy to be a sort of an anchor limited partner and an early commitment, an early investor, ultimately the test of your business success will be your ability to tap the market for money. So up front, we'd like to see smart LPs coming along with us to back these new managers.
I will ask you a series of questions, and I apologize in advance. It will be short. There are 4 questions. First, what is your Tier 1 capital?
It's all Tier 1.
All Tier 1, okay. Thank you. When you analyze the risk of investment in specific project, do you use like country-specific risk, company systemic risk? Like, do you use CDS or do you use like some other instruments?
We have our own risk rating system, which looks both at country risk and individual project structure risk.
Thank you. And last question is, what percentage is your mezzanine capital that you like when you use? How often do you use mezzanine capital when you finance the project?
Infrequently, because these structures are oftentimes difficult to implement. We did a fair amount of mezz capital in the banks last year.
Are you planning to use COCO, like covered convertible? Not really.
No.
And the last question, where do you see the growth beyond BRICS, like in the area you're covering?
Beyond BRICS.
This is the last question, thank you.
Beyond BRICS, well, look, Turkey. I mean, that's the big success story in our region. It's not commonly seen as a transition economy because it was never under communist domination, but it really is an economy which is changing in very many ways, from the relationship between the state and the private sector. But I would also be optimistic for a number of other countries. Poland has been a good, steady performer. Some of the Western Balkan countries are doing surprisingly well. They're small, they're difficult economies, and these are the fellows that have to really work hard to internationalize. So there's opportunity in many of these economies.
I just wanted to follow up on that question that was partially mine. Since you travel often to these various countries, on the slide that you showed, some of the countries are going sideways, some are moving up like Poland, and some are going down. What is the key? Countries like Poland, what are they doing that their neighbors aren't doing? They're going sideways. What are you seeing?
Democracy, a more mature financial system, public expenditure restraint, consistency of policies, transparency, stronger legal systems, stronger governance, less kleptocracy. Quite a variety of things which separate the successful from the less successful countries.
Hi, my name is Masha from with Accenture Sustainability Services. I'm actually working on that transaction, trying to develop a transaction in emerging markets for energy efficiency, working with EBRD and World Economic Forum, et cetera. And I was wondering, from your experience, you have experience with IFC in the past, how do you see the role of EBRD different from other development organizations such as IFC or World Bank, that are also players in those regions?
Right. There are a variety of differences. For those of you who don't know the alphabet soup, the World Bank is focused on government support. They are a lender to governments. They do not work with the private sector. They have an affiliate, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which does work with private sector. And IFC, in many respects, is quite similar to EBRD in that they provide loans and equity for private companies. Unlike us, IFC can only work with private companies. And IFC also, unlike us, has a large advisory practice. So they sell advisory services to the private sector. EBRD is capable of working with both governments and private companies, although we are largely a private company-focused institution. We are different in two primary regards, and those go back to the reason that EBRD was founded, rather than just having, why another regional development bank to deal with the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are required to finance transition. we have to demonstrate how everything that we do helps to move an economy to market economy. The other development banks, regional banks, are free of those constraints, that constraint. We also are unique in that our charter has, as the very first element, the requirement that we support the development of democratic institutions and politically pluralistic societies. This is quite a challenge for a banking institution to somehow be in the realm of politics. But how do we do it? It's basically the private sector again. Private sector, entrepreneurship, risk-taking. These are all big forces for individual accountability and for a different compact between the citizen and government. So we believe that a strong private sector is really helpful for developing democratic tendencies. There are some countries in which we're a little bit more reluctant to work because they don't meet our Article 1 test quite so well, where perhaps we would only deal with pure private sector investments and stay away from an investment that touched on the public sector or might have benefited a public sector institution in some fashion, for example.
Warren, my name is Rinat Kasanshin. I'm an entrepreneur. I live here, and I'm an investor in Eastern Europe and Russia, and specifically in Belarus. And I have a few questions that probably represent interest of quite a few people in the audience. The questions, very quick, similar to Lev's questions related to EBRD strategy to limited partnership investments in venture funds. The first one is, if we were to analyze the proposals for limited partner investments coming from newly created venture funds, what are the top 3 areas that are challenged by the committee that could be considered as weak?
You mean what we would look at in the private equity manager?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like past performance?
Well, clearly past performance, the kind of engagements that the team has had. Have they worked together in the past? Do they have experience which complements one another? Do they have the back office necessary to support record keeping and reporting? Are they realistic in their plan? How convincing is their ability to source transactions? And where would they fit amongst their peer group?
Mm-hmm. Great. What is your strategy on diversification? And if you could give us a brief glance on potentially how many newly created funds that EBRD could back potentially in Eastern Europe and Russia region over the next 3-5 years would be like 3, 5, 25?
Yes. We're not the limiting factor. Good managers and the other limited partners to support them are the limiting factors. We're not in the business of being an LP that owns a fund. We need to, we'll take 25, 35% of a fund, but we really want to see institutional risk-taking money coming into these funds alongside us. At the very beginning, EBRD did do 100% EBRD funds. They were called the Russia Venture Funds. And if I recall correctly, I wasn't at the institution then, there were 12 of them or 11 of them that EBRD financed. And they were focused on various regions of Russia.
What happened?
4 of them are among the leading fund managers in Russia today. Not a bad survival rate considering the wild, turbulent, uncharted times in which these funds started.
Did the bank overall made money?
We have turned in consistent double-digit returns on our private equity program.
Oh, great.
After fees.
And the last one, as a native of a relatively small country in the region, I'm a native of Belarus. How big is your interest on a scale from 1 to 10 to receive proposals from teams that will operate primarily in Belarus? I mean, the venture capital.
Yeah, pure private sector teams, 10.
Oh, great, Warren. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes. We also have
I had this question, and obviously it's kind of tainted because we're here in Silicon Valley, we do everything, virtually almost everything with equity. Why is it that you do so much debt? Is it because of the exits, or is it capital markets?
It's basically the nature of the opportunities that we see. I would love to do more equity because, on a debt transaction we'll make, 1 or 2 or 3% net. On an equity transaction, our historic average direct investment rate of return is in the mid-teens. Okay, that isn't, knock your socks off 20 and 30 and 40% returns, but that's over a 20-year history, and that's through how many crises? And it's, frankly, I don't think it's too shabby. But that's the way we grow our capital. In EBRD's lifetime, we've gone back to our shareholders twice to get a capital increase. The last time was this last year, which was prompted by the financial crisis, not because we lost money, but because the demands on us were so great that we were increasing the pace of our activity at a high rate, and we needed more capital to sustain that growth. We could not be operating today at a 9 billion euro basis, as we have been for the last almost 2 years now, without that extra capital that we received. Now, back to your underlying question. Sure, we'd love to do more equity. Show me more entrepreneurs who need the equity, who can use it, and who will meet our standards of integrity and transparency. And we'll be very happy to back them.
And if I may add one other question, completely different. We, in the Silicon Valley, we always talk about staying on top of the IP value chain. And I think you were talking about it earlier about manufacturing and the companies, the countries that are around places that could no longer manufacture, but surely those countries probably keep the IP or know-how and processes, etc. With your investment focus, obviously in a region that has a lot of problems with IP protection, what are the things that, how do you protect yourselves, or how do the companies protect themselves? Are there certain mechanisms that you put in place, or just relying on?
I wish I could say that there was an easy magic bullet for that. The truth is that there isn't. And one might ask the same question about IP protection in China, for example. I think that our region is not alone in terms of the fragility with which ideas and information can be stolen. And a lot of companies I know don't take the latest technology in, or they do so under very tight control. But all that I can say is this is going to have to change. And what will make it change? Increasingly, the IP is local. And what happens when, let's pick on Russia, they're a big country. When Russian entrepreneurs start to develop an appreciable amount of IP, they're going to want it protected. It's no longer a case of people appropriating from the outside. It's your neighbor appropriating what is yours. And I think that is a subtle difference, but one which will perhaps bring an increasing outcry. And the other factor would be the institutionalization, particularly of venture investing. Many of you in this room, I know, are looking at Russia and the other countries in the region. And as you come into the countries, as you as entrepreneurs start joint ventures with colleagues in those countries, it's an issue that you're going to work very hard on and pay more attention to. And hence, I think the standards will change, but they're not there yet.
More questions?
Now, I know this is several questions. I've been forewarned.
I have a question. When you decided to leverage one-to-one your capital, is it typical for your redevelopment industry? Because what was behind this decision, if I may ask? You answered my question. I was going to ask you how the bank crisis affected your bank.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for answering that.
Yes.
First time.
A typical bank might be levered 20 times. I mean, banks are typically very high leverage institutions. Why are we only levered 1-to-1? Because we take one heck of a lot of risk, and we work in what has been a real frontier of the private sector. And to be credible with our bondholders, the people who finance us, we have to show that we have a very, very strong financial support, and that come hell or high water, those bonds are going to get repaid. That's why we have capital. Some of that capital is not actually paid in subscribed capital; it's committed. So we borrow in we borrow in the capital markets, but on the basis that if there is a problem, our shareholders are good for the cash.
Another question I have. You were doing 400, I heard 400 deals this year.
Yes.
That's quite a lot. So you're thinking about it. What's the average time turnaround for this?
Well, it all depends. What does it depend on? Largely the business that we're working with. How quickly do they make decisions? Are they capable of working through the standard legal documentation in a business-like fashion? Do they know their business? Can they justify the financial models and the business plan and demonstrate that they're capable of executing? The answer is it can take anywhere from an infinite amount of time down to, our record is 1 week. Yeah, that was a known client, one that we knew very well. It was in Russia, by the way, and for which there was a sudden refinancing need caused by the financial crisis, and we were able to turn around the transaction in a week. Now, I don't want to do that again. If I give you a more honest answer, if we've got a good client who's disciplined and professional and doesn't have lots of things hidden behind the scenes, where you can go in and do a business-like due diligence, somewhere between 3 and 6 months.
Well, the reason I'm asking is time is money, and you guys, a lot of venture funds are seeking returns as soon as possible because the returns will be higher. Time is money, right? And for entrepreneurs who are seeking investments, it's an important consideration. They have to deliver within reasonable amounts of time. So venture capital firms here a lot of times will take control or input some control, trying to accelerate the process or control the process of company going public or some exit strategy, so that they would return the principal and hopefully return some on principal. You guys obviously don't do that, but that's what I heard. You're minority shareholder in equity, but still time is important consideration for you. So I guess I had a question, but I lost it.
Well, let me follow up on that. Maybe it'll prompt, or maybe I'll answer by accident what you were going to ask. The majority of our investment is not venture; it's growth equity. Maybe some greenfield investments, but usually with established sponsors. So we don't have the same sort of time horizon as a venture capital investor would. We don't have the issue of being quite so Darwinian in terms of early failures and making sure that you weed out the unsuccessful and nurture the successful. That's a different characteristic. When we invest with venture capitalists, then you'll find that we have different spots. In terms of our horizon, the typical growth equity investment for us will be in our portfolio between 3 and 6 years. Long enough to see the company grow and be successful, to return our expectations of return, and also to meet our what I call transition goals. I said that we're a transition institute. When we invest, we have different ideas as to what we're going to contribute through this investment to the private sector. And once those objectives are met, then the only reason to hang around is a financial reason. And if our financial reasons are satisfied, then it's time to exit.
Can you expand upon that special charter statement you've made? Can you give an example of what type of transition goals you might have?
Improving competition, improving transparency, taking a large company and instituting majority independent board members, having an audit committee, having IFRS accounting, things of that nature. Nothing that's really exotic or rocket science, but then that's what creating a private sector is all about. It's pretty basic stuff.
Taking it one step farther.
Yeah, exactly. And even in relatively advanced economies, and take Poland, we still find opportunities, for example, to privatize and restructure. We just did a large transaction in the chemicals industry, which was, first of all, a restructuring of the company, both financial and operational, in preparation for its privatization. That's transition in practice.
I think we have time for one more question.
With the global economy, how do you determine the region of operation? For example, if product is developed in Ukraine and the target market is India, would you consider such kind of a project?
Certainly. Our statutes require us to invest in our countries of operations. And what does this mean? It means that basically our money has to go into one of those 30 countries for an investment that substantially benefits that economy. So that would mean the IP is developed there, maybe the majority of the intellectual workforce is there. Not that the market has to be there, and not that we actually have to invest into that country. We could invest in a Delaware corporation, which is the investor into that country, for example. And of course, when we invest in a private equity fund, we generally are investing in Delaware, Cayman, other offshore structures. Good.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Varel, for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And if you have any more questions, I think maybe you can spare another.
Sure.
Well, you have some more privatization going on with GM there, maybe.
It's time to reprivatize, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation very, very interesting.